So I finally got a chance to play around with zoom, pan, and vary, and I wondered whether this might give us more options for character consistency. And guess what? It does. That's right, Carla is back, and she's better than ever. I managed to take these original character shots and turn them into this, or this, and even this. I believe I may have found a workflow or perhaps even a template that allows us to create nearly any scene we like based on our original character concept. So what's the secret? Well, stick around and you'll find out. If you haven't watched part 7 of my character design series yet, you really should. It's absolutely foundational to everything that I'm going to show you in today's video. So as much as I'd like to show you the entire process here again, it's simply a little bit too long and there's no point in really recording it over and over again. So once you're done with this video, make sure you check out the other video as well, just so you understand how we get here to this point. Because at the very end of that particular video, part 7, I end up with a prompt that looks a little bit like this. It starts off with a total of 8 image references, followed by a text prompt that reads style like Marvel comic illustration and 3D animation and anime on digital art background, full body image of an attractive European woman with bright red braided bun hair, wearing jacket in black color, wearing pants in white color, standing in a New York City street, followed by some parameters. I'll explain this prompt in a little more detail in a minute, but it basically produces images that look like this. These are the exact images that I show at the very end of part 7 of my character design series. So for the sake of continuity, I'm going to continue exactly where I left off back then. Now, a lot has changed ever since I recorded that video back in March. And most importantly, I've since released my foundational prompting course called Masters of Midjourney. So if you're looking for a holistic education in how to use Midjourney properly in the same style or a similar style as the YouTubes that you see on my channel, then make sure you check out the links in the description. Alright, so let's get back to Carla. You may have created your own character slightly differently from what I showed in part 7. And of course, I can't really cover everyone's special needs. So that's why I'm going to continue with the Carla that I created back then, or at the very least, with the prompt that I used back then. We basically have 2 options at our disposal now. Option 1 is for me to use the very same prompt that I showed with you earlier, which contains the reference images. As you can see, I've cleaned it up a little bit, and I've also removed the location, but it's essentially still the very same prompt that also uses an image weight parameter in order to control the strength of the image references. Let me quickly show you what those 8 image references actually look like, just to refresh your memory, or if you haven't watched part 7, to give you an idea of what they look like. They basically contain various different headshots of a character that looks similar to our Carla character from all sorts of different camera angles, including from behind. So here's an example of what sort of images this prompt will create. They obviously look slightly different from before because we're now working with version 5.2 rather than version 5, and things have changed ever since. But you can clearly see that these 4 characters look more or less the same. Now, while these images are much closer to the kind of style that I'm looking for, they do have one major drawback. You probably didn't notice, but 2 or 3 of the image references that I showed you earlier actually contained images of a woman with very slight shoulder straps. And Midjourney seems to be very sensitive to these shoulder straps, which is why you're seeing them in each one of these images. And while this may seem like a little detail, it can become a little bit of a problem later on as you are generating new images and you keep seeing those shoulder straps showing up over and over again. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be a problem, but if you're extremely picky about your character's outfit, and I know some of you are, then this may be a problem. So in that case, you still have option 2, which is to use the very same prompt, but without any image references. Let me quickly show you what this would look like. I'm going to use the exact same prompt, with the only difference that I'm going to remove the image references, and we just have the text prompt. Let's have a quick look at what these look like. Okay, cool. And I know what some of you guys are going to say. These 2 on the right, they also have these straps over the shoulders, and I honestly don't know why. But you can clearly see on the left that we've got 2 options of characters that do not have those shoulder straps. So I generally believe that using something without image references tends to be the better approach further down the line if you want to have more control. But for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to use option 1 with the image references simply because it's a little bit more difficult. And I also know that a lot of you do not want to compromise on the look of your character. So let's continue with option 1. So normally what I would do now is I would go back to my prompt from option 1, and I would continuously re-roll until I do get an image that looks good and that does not have any shoulder straps. However, as this may take a little bit longer, I am going to continue just with what we have now. That will also probably best show you what sort of challenges this will produce further down the road. So what we would do then is we would simply upscale number 3 in this case, because I'm going to pick this one. There you go. We've got our upscaled image. Let me quickly show you an enlarged version. This is our new Carla Caruso. And this is now where all of the fun begins. All right, so we're now going to go through various different steps using multiple different features, including vary, pan, zoom. So try to take some notes. And there's not a single way to do this, but I do think it'll help you sort of recap the process that I'm following here. So before we start, it's important that we activate remix mode, because this will allow us to make changes to the prompt whenever we use the vary button or the zoom out custom zoom button or the pan buttons. And this is very, very important for what we're trying to do. Okay, so in step 1, I'm going to click on the very strong button, and this will open up the remix prompt. And what we're going to do now is we're going to remove all of the image references in our prompt. We're also going to remove the image weight parameter, and I'm going to make some slight changes to the prompt. So first of all, I'm going to add shot from behind, and then I'm also going to add details about what she's wearing, and I'm also going to add some details about the environment, looking into distant landscape of the Grand Canyon. So this is basically the point where you think about what sort of a scene you want to create using your character, what your character is wearing, what your character is doing, and just sort of the basic overall idea. You don't need to have all of the details right yet, but just, add some rough details. So then I hit the submit button. I wait for the prompt to generate, and then we get these 4 shots. So clearly our character Carla is not looking straight into the camera, one of the things that most people get annoyed by, but instead she's standing somewhere on a ledge and she's looking into the distance of a landscape which hopefully will be the Grand Canyon or something that resembles the Grand Canyon. Overall, her look is still the same, exactly as she should look. Her hairstyles are slightly different in each image, but that's fine. So what we need to do now is we need to pick one of these images and upscale it. I'm going to go with the bottom right one in this case. So I'm going to hit the U4 button, wait for that to upscale. And now what we want to do is we want to use the pan feature. Now in this case, I'm going to pan down because I want to see a little bit more of her body. So I'm going to click on pan down. This will open up yet another remix prompt. But in this case, I don't need to make any changes because the concept of the shot is still more or less the same. I just want to see more of the character's body. So I hit the submit button, and again, I wait for it to generate. Cool, this is what these images look like. Now you'll notice that there's a lot of red for some reason at the bottom of her lower body, and that's because I did not make any changes to the prompt. So that's why my prompt still contains the word, like a reference to red, bright red braided bun hair, even though the section which we panned down doesn't actually contain any hair. So these are some elements that might be confusing to Midjourney, so it's producing results that are not necessarily what we would expect. If you wanted to avoid this, what you would do is you would actually change the prompt entirely to something like lower body of woman sitting on a rock or something like that. But I did this because I wanted to show you how it doesn't matter how or whether you change the prompt as you do these different operations on the image. But we're going to work with what we have right now. And I'm going to pick one that actually looks the least strange, which is the bottom left one here. And then I'm going to just upscale it. So I'll hit U3 and wait for the upscaled image. Now you might be tempted to pan even further down, especially if your character was standing and not sitting somewhere. But I would say be careful with that. So I wouldn't really pan more than once or twice, simply because the more you do that, the less control you will have over the overall proportions of the character. I tried doing this with an earlier version of this character and tried to create just one big standing person, just one tall standing person, but that didn't really work because then the lower body got these really out of whack proportions that didn't work quite well. So instead of panning further down, what we're going to do now is I'm going to use the custom zoom button. This opens up the remix prompt again. And in this case, I'm going to use a zoom out of 1.5. And I'm also going to change the aspect ratio to about 4:5, which is different from the image that we have now after panning. And what this will do is this will zoom out just a slight bit. It will maintain the image and just give us a different proportion. And it will also allow us to pan to the side again, because right now we can only pan up or down. So I'll hit the submit button. And what we get are these images here, which look really great. Now, you don't necessarily have to follow these exact procedures as I've done them here. It really depends on what sort of a scene you want to create and what parts of your character's body you need and what you need to change. But this is just an example of how you could do it. So again, let's pick the one that we like most. They look more or less the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick the bottom right one, which is U4. I will upscale it. Let's have a real quick look. Yep, looks great. And what this does is it gives us extra options again. So now we can use vary again. We can use the pan to the side features. That's one of the things that you need to bear in mind. You won't always have all these features at the very same time for every upscale. So in this image, what we're going to do next is we're going to pan to the right. So I'm going to click on the pan right button and I'm going to change the prompt. I'm going to remove all of the references to the details of our character or the character itself, because in the next frame that we're enlarging, we're not going to have a character in that frame. So instead, it's just going to be landscape. So here I have digital art like Marvel comic illustration and 3D animation and anime, landscape of Grand Canyon. I hit submit. Okay, cool. So let's have a quick look. And as you can see, it has expanded our scene of the Grand Canyon. Our Carla character is still the same. The only thing that has changed is that we now have more context. So from these, we're going to pick the one that we like the most. I'm going to go with the bottom left one this time, and I'll upscale it. You now basically have multiple options. You could either continue panning to the right, or you could pan to the left. I am going to actually use something different. I'm going to use the custom zoom to slightly zoom out again and change the aspect ratio to a wider ratio. So I'm going to click on custom zoom. And what I'll do is I'm going to also change the prompt by adding woman overlooking the landscape of the Grand Canyon. Then I'm going to add an aspect ratio of 16:9. I'm going to do about 1.5 zoom out. Now, the reason why I'm adding back in the woman overlooking the landscape is because this now references the overall image. So I hit submit. Okay, cool. So now this basically completes our entire scene. We have our Carla character sitting on a rock somewhere on top of the Grand Canyon, looking into the canyon itself. And this is something that we couldn't have done before. Our character has remained consistent and we've placed her into a wider scene. Now, it's great that we can use our character and place her into a scene, but what if we wanted to add a second character as well? One that doesn't necessarily have to resemble anybody specific, but that is just a second character within that image. Well, in order to do that, we would first go one step back because we need a little bit more space to fill. So we're back to the one where we simply pan to the right once, and this time we're going to pan further to the right and add more content to the image. Now, I think you'll be surprised to see just how much you can still change in this image. And let me start off with a very simple example. Let's go back to our prompt. I'm going to click on the pan right button. And this time I'm going to change my prompt and add the same style at the beginning, but then man overlooking landscape of the Grand Canyon. I'll hit submit. All right, cool. So if we look at these four images, we can see that we've added a second character into the scene. And I'll admit that the first three ones are not ideal because the existing context of the image that we panned was suggesting that there wasn't a lot more space for a person to stand on the right. But the one on the right, bottom right is actually pretty good. Now, if you want to add a character and maybe have them a little bit more prominent in the image, then in this case, what we would do is we would go back to the original here. We would hit pan right one more time, and we'll use a slightly different prompt. So again, we still have the style prompt at the beginning, then medium side profile shot of man looking to left, Grand Canyon in background. Now, not all of this will necessarily be reflected in the image that we get afterwards, but it will be different. So I'll hit submit. And this time you can see that our second character is much closer to the camera now. And this is much more realistic. This is comparable to sort of scene that you would actually create. And I think we might actually be able to take this even further. So let's go back and hit the pan button one more time. And this time I'm going to change the prompt like this: close-up shot from behind of a backpacker. I'll hit submit. And once again, these look great. Now, while these may not be much closer than the previous ones, it does show that we're able to change what the character looks like. So in this case, it is a backpacker. We can see the backpack on the character's back. Now, there's one more thing I want to show you, because what if we wanted to reintroduce a specific character? And in this case, I'm going to try to reintroduce Carla next to Carla. So I'll hit pan one more time. And this time I'm going to replace the entire prompt with the original prompt that even contained the image references. Now, I'm going to warn you, this is going to be a little bit of a strange image, but I just want to show you what this can do. So you can see it's the whole prompt. The only thing I've added is looking away. And then I hit submit, and let's have a look. All right, cool. And I know this one is a little bit strange, but hear me out, because the point of this is to demonstrate just how much control you have with these new features. In this example, I managed to take an old version of Carla with image references and basically smack her right into this scene in a way that maybe feels a little bit unnatural, but the point is, it's possible. And the way this happens is largely dependent on how you prompt, right? So it's not just about what features you use, but how you craft the prompt for every single time you use one of these features. And just imagine what this means for not just character design and character creation, but also for storytelling. All of a sudden, you are capable of reintroducing pretty much any character for which you have a proper, strong prompt for the character, and you can reintroduce that character into nearly any other scene. And that character is not just stuck in one particular pose, but you can actually change what that character is doing. Now, you may have to re-roll every now and then just to make sure that the facial features are right. But this is unbelievable. And all of a sudden, multi-character scenes don't seem so daunting anymore. Now, there's another thing I want to show you. And in order to do so, we need to go back to our original wide angle shot, which are these here of just Carla. Because once we choose one of these images to upscale, I'm going to do that with the bottom right one, scroll down, we now have the option to use the very strong button again. Now you might be wondering, why would I want to do that? This is the perfect image. Well, is it the perfect image? We don't know. Maybe you want to see more variations of this, and you can get that. So we'll hit the very strong button. I will not change anything about this prompt this time. I'll hit submit. So what this just did is it took the concept of the image that we created and basically tried to create new variations of that very same concept. Now, you might argue that we're not really entirely sure whether our Carla character looks exactly the same, and the hair does look slightly different. But depending on your specific use case, whether you're creating a storyboard or a comic book, you may not always need to have extreme perfect consistency. So something like the hairstyle may not be so important. The view may be more important for you. But we can actually take this one step further. So I'm going to go back and hit the very strong button on the original image one more time. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to change Grand Canyon to the Swiss Alps. Hit submit. And what we get is a derivative of our Carla character, now overlooking the Swiss Alps. Now, obviously, the more you vary, the more you will lose consistency, especially if you're varying the entire scene. However, it just shows you how much control you have and how you can actually create so many useful images for certain scenes where the perfect sort of consistency of your character isn't necessarily so important. And this is especially true for scenes that are very zoomed out. And even tiny little details where the color of the clothes may have changed. Once Midjourney finally introduces in painting, you'll be able to fix those fairly easily as well. Okay, so I think it's time for a recap. So this little exercise was very enlightening for me as well, because even though the zoom and the pan features may look pretty simplistic on the surface, once you start to understand how they work and what they allow you to do, they actually open up so many possibilities. So character consistency isn't really that much of an issue anymore, as long as you start with a facial concept of your character and then moving your way outwards. And even then, you saw that you could introduce an additional character as long as the prompt, like the core text prompt of that character, is strong and consistent enough. So despite all of these features being really great, you also start to understand that structuring your prompt properly is actually the key to success. And even though I don't specifically cover character design within my course, I do provide all of my students with the foundational prompting skills that you need in order to create properly structured prompts that you can then use within all of these tools. So finding solutions to character consistency becomes just so much easier if you know and understand how to use Midjourney properly. So if you're interested in actually learning how to take control of Midjourney, then check out Masters of Midjourney at mastersofmidjourney.com, or simply check the link in the description. Who knows, maybe you'll be one of my future students. All right, so let me quickly recap the process that I used in this video. Step 0. Everything started with the original upscaled headshot concept, in this case with references. Then in step 1, you click the very strong button, we remove the references, and then we add all sorts of details. In this particular case, we also removed the white background and replaced it with a location, and getting the right camera angle was absolutely critical. Then in step 2, we upscaled the image that we preferred, and you can either use pan 1 or 2 times to build out your partial character. And in step 3, we upscaled our preferred image one more time, and then used the zoom out feature, either the regular zoom out or the custom zoom, to basically enlarge the frame's context. Then in step 4, we upscaled our preferred image again, and we then used the pan feature as much as necessary, either going left, right, up, or down. You can also add more details or characters as well, as I show you. Then in step 5, we upscaled our preferred image one more time, and then used the custom zoom to get the aspect ratio that we need, and also slightly zoom out even further to get even more context. And finally, in step 6, which is mostly just optional, we used the very strong button in order to get more ideas and variations of the very same concept. So even though there isn't one single way to do this, you do notice that it is a constant interplay between the different features that you have at your disposal. So be it very strong, be it pan, zoom, it doesn't really matter, but the constant switching back and forth tends to balance out any potential deformities of the anatomy of your character. How much you end up actually using these features and how many steps you end up going through mostly depends on what sort of an image you're trying to create, how big the scene should be, and how small or large your character should be within that scene. All right, so that's it for today. I hope you found this useful for your very own projects. And if you want to learn more about character design as well as alternative prompting methods, then check out some of these videos or playlists shown here on the screen. And most importantly, keep on learning. Take care.